Hi everybody. Should I get closer to the microphone? Is that okay? Oh, I can get two. It's like stereo. Amazing. Okay, cool. So I wanted to kind of talk about algorithms as kind of something that's a phenomenon that's really kind of prevalent in the world we live in right now. But then also start to think about how artists are using algorithms, software broadly, and also interrogating them and kind of trying to examine what kind of role they play and trying to kind of take them apart perhaps to help us understand them better and understand sort of how we can be through algorithms. So with that in mind, I think it's sort of really four major areas. Firstly, kind of understanding what an algorithm is, what its history is, and kind of broader what the implications and questions are around sort of the world we live in and how algorithms affect us. And then looking at a couple of artists to really kind of think about how arts practice can help to kind of interrogate that. And finally, sort of looking at sort of conclusions, which perhaps are not so much conclusions, but kind of some observations that can hopefully create some kind of discourse afterwards. I mean, we've only got 13 minutes now, so I'm not going to go into loads of detail, but I think it would be really great to kind of reflect on some of these ideas in the questions afterwards. So, starting out, so algorithms really aren't something new. I think you could probably trace them back to Babylonian times. This picture on the left here is actually a recipe book from, I think, the 14th century in England. Is the oldest known recipe book. This is a recipe, would you know it, for porpoise in broth. It sounds like a really delicious soup, but you could kind of translate an algorithm as just a step-by-step process. Alan Turing also kind of took that idea of creating a process to actually solve problems, and his machine is exactly that. So thinking about sort of an algorithm as kind of a way of kind of stepping through something, of abstracting a process and making it self-referential, self-fulfilling, is a good way to think about things. Something that came to mind here really was kind of how you can think about Heidegger in this context and objects, the world around you, your Gestell being close at hand, and what kinds of problems an abstracted thing kind of creates in that kind of context. So, fast forward a few years, and this is Amazon's warehouse in the US. You could kind of call it a relational warehouse. It's a massive database on top of a physical item that's controlled by a number of algorithms. What's interesting and kind of mind-boggling here is the scale at which this operates at. We can no longer really kind of identify exactly what kind of role an algorithm plays in our lives because it affects us in so many different ways. If we kind of try and think about the assemblage as like a way of kind of creating subjectivity, the fact that we have a real problem in kind of identifying what kind of affects or how many affects an algorithm has, if you take Amazon as an example, how often the algorithm actually sort of interrogates us and kind of creates different types of matter or materiality around us to kind of order our Christmas presents. Or, I don't know, I ordered a microphone the other day and got a whole series of recommendations. This idea of it kind of creating multiple realities is kind of problematic for this idea of you creating your subjectivity by things around you. If we kind of take it in the other way, this idea of multiple algorithms, many different kind of things interacting with you at any given time, you start to see kind of interesting errors. This is kind of one of my favorite autocorrect memes. I just particularly like Macaulay Culkin at the bottom. But this kind of idea of assemblages of algorithms and how you, by creating these sort of lists of abstracted things that have very kind of specific purposes, you start to sort of see gaps and problems and errors that kind of get to this idea of, or problem of multiplicity, but then also of kind of how can you kind of get to a real kind of relation with these kinds of things that are so abstracted and so kind of self-referential. And this kind of makes me start to think about sort of Foucault's idea of power being sort of relational, but then also how you can kind of get to the bottom of this and kind of really think about sort of how many affects these algorithms create around us. This is an image of Google stock price at the bottom, but then also the data center in, I think, Arizona somewhere, But what's interesting here is that, I mean, I often think about sort of ideology and algorithms, and whether that is a kind of thing, whether you can actually create something that has a particular purpose when you're creating something quite so abstracted as an algorithm, and whether you can actually really understand sort of all of the kinds of interactions you can have with an algorithm. Perhaps this kind of gets to the idea of, rather than it being sort of market conditions and the fact that you can play pool or table tennis in a Google data center, that maybe this idea of us trying to kind of consider the algorithm as a kind of very sort of dumb machine is perhaps the wrong kind of thing. And instead we need to start to think about the kind of the stack, if we think about Ben Bratton, but then also the significant number of relations that we can have with it, and how that kind of how we can kind of live with an algorithm in that sort of way. If we now sort of move to kind of perhaps this idea of how we should think differently in terms of kind of moving perhaps from an anthropocentric world that we kind of think about sort of us having sort of subject-object relationships with an algorithm to maybe somewhere where perhaps we're much closer to an algorithm and that it affects us in a significantly larger and more sort of multiplicitous different type of way. We can start to maybe think that this idea of algorithms creating sort of multiple features in terms of creating sort of shaping and adapting our world around us starts to kind of territorialize us in a certain way. And perhaps then we can start to think about how we can use art practice to try and deterritorialize that idea of understanding algorithms as a sort of a very anthropocentric way, and start to think about how we can playfully examine that. So I'm just going to touch on two artists and refer to another one. But this idea of kind of accepting that machines or software algorithms have a kind of significantly more vibrant role in our lives, as per Jane Bennett, is a really interesting way to think of it. And I think these two artists really kind of examine that in a quite interesting way and kind of get away from that kind of idea of us being in a very subject-object relationship with the algorithm. So firstly, this is a work by Yoha, who is it's a partnership of artists, Graham Harwood and Matsuko Yokoji. And they've worked together since 1994. But this is a work they did with Matthew Fuller called Endless War. So this examines, whoops, sorry, I meant to be playing a video here. This examines the war diaries. So this is the war diaries leaked by Edward Snowden and Julian Assange in WikiLeaks. And really what this kind of looks at is kind of how these kinds of huge data sets, so this is a 700,000 odd line database of information collected during the Iraq War and, the Afghan War, and sort of this is soldiers, this is people on the ground, this is intelligence, GPS data. Oh, it's not working. I think it is working, it's just very slow. I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. But this is a collection of GPS data that is insanely difficult to understand. What Yoha's done is actually sort of use use MySQL and n-gram analysis, so use the actual tools that are used to create these kinds of databases to start to interrogate it, to ask it questions, and really start to get under the skin of what this machine wants, what kind of politics it has, and really sort of understand how it's structured, to try and kind of ask it some questions in a kind of way to really understand sort of what the types of affects that this kind of corpus of data can have on the people who are inputting information into it, the decisions that are made around sort of the war that it's kind of calculating, but then also the decision around the sort of more global context of the people who interact with it. So this work uses a visual representation of both the code, the result, and then also the actual sort of machinic process of this SQL algorithm. This is the sound that it makes. But also contact microphones itself. So you start to understand how the algorithm is affecting the machine, but it also places you right inside the actual process. It gets on your nerves after a while, but the idea is that this kind of puts you very much within the machine. It starts to kind of situate you in the actual process of the algorithm operating and starts to kind of take apart both the horror of the actual information within a database, but then also how it's structured and the kinds of outputs that it's going to create. So it starts to create multiple ways of sort of interacting with a type of a piece of software that really interrogates the actual impacts or some of the potential impacts that just a single set of or a number of lines of code can have on communities across the world. Taking things the other way around, so this is a recent commission of Cecile B. Evans's and Ben Vickers at the Serpentine Gallery. This is Agnes, which lives on the Serpentine Gallery's website. So Agnes is a kind of a simplified spam bot, effectively, that is endowed with certain kinds of qualities by Cecile B. Evans, but then also kind of created as kind of an examination of what a digital artifact could be. She's learnt a bunch of stuff about the people who work at the Serpentine, as well as things around about the world around her. These are all things that potentially, if you lived within the internet, you could potentially find out. But I think the interesting thing here is that Cecile B. Evans is looking at sort of, you know, whether you can kind of personify this kind of piece of code, whether you can kind of, by echoing the pop-up queries of market research or prompts on social networks, meme-like YouTube videos, can you bring together sort of the physicality of sort of a real thing? What is interesting, though, is that the thing that comes apart is that Agnes is incomplete. It's very much something that is brought on by the interaction with people on the website, but then also that there are limits to her information. There is very obvious kind of inputs of information, but I think that this kind of serves to kind of really take apart these kinds of things and start to kind of create from the inside out a relational thing that has both major flaws in the terms of it being very abstracted, but then also significant amounts of agency on us, but then also on the people that Agnes talks about at the Serpentine. So more broadly, and I wanted to quickly just talk about Giulietta Aranda and Anton Vodokler's time bank. I just wanted to kind of conclude here around sort of examining art methods as a means for interrogation and to deterritorialize certain things. I mean, time bank here is not about algorithms, but what this does is it examines and outsmarts currency and capitalist systems and exposes and posits alternatives for people to kind of to interact with something that's kind of very territorialized and sort of normalized. What I think these two artists do with software is exactly the same thing. So it really starts to take apart, you know, what we accept as something that is very, very sort of concrete, and starts to build into the sort of the multiple levels of influence that algorithms and software can have. Instead, so I'd like to posit that instead, perhaps, you know, art methods can give us the perspective and curiosity, the ability to rework and re-examine things, to discover and unpack the materiality of things like the algorithm. And it allows for a deterritorialization in a Guattarian way of our habitual conception of a thing. It makes it slightly less thingy and exposes the effects that it has. Art methods allows for an examination not of the outputs or the substance of the things being observed, but instead the world around it. It pulls focus from what's immediately in front of you to the structures that are behind it, the multiple layers of relations, and the almost infinite effects that the algorithm can have. And perhaps the artist's viewpoint, the ability to ask different questions, to place the algorithm in a different situation and bring these particular technical objects closer to us, acknowledges that perhaps there isn't that much difference between us and them, that they are very close at hand, but in a different way, and in a way that is inherently collective and inherently reciprocal. Thanks.
Hello, thanks for inviting us. So, our presentation is to do with how software studies can influence the way we think about encounters with art. Software studies is an approach based on the fact that we are surrounded by software. To quote Matthew Fuller, software studies structures and makes possible much of the contemporary world. With this in mind, software studies as a field combines work from different disciplines in order to explore our interactions with computing, thinking about software in a cultural and as well as a scientific sense. This diagram shows the steps which are involved in processing a card payment. This is not the customer's experience of shopping, of picking up food, putting it in your basket and going up to the checkout, and deciding to pay by card. Looking at the interactions here, we can see that buildings, machines, and businesses are involved at different levels, at different stages, made possible by software. And this is before thinking about the processes behind things like barcode scanning, and is thinking about how the food has actually arrived on the shelves. So when you're in the supermarket or in the shop, the idea is that through software being present, there are a number of different systems which we don't necessarily always think about. So we're kind of trying to think about how looking at the systems and the softwares involved can help us to look at art and interactions with art in a different way. So we took death of the author as a starting point. The idea of the shift in balance of power from author or maker, kind of all-powerful humanist author, to the viewer is challenged or expanded by the influence of software. A two-way system just isn't sufficient to explain the relationships involved in the contemporary world, and obviously many artists have taken this on. We're going to look at some of those a little bit later. So let's go. Okay, this image is a little unclear in terms of text, but it's showing 6 different kinds of network. And these types of network were chosen by curators for an exhibition called Information Age, which is opened recently at the Science Museum in London. You may have seen the Queen there. The Queen opened it and tweeted. So this is kind of an example in part of the way in which you can deal with the different kinds of technical objects, the different kinds of objects which make up contributed in some way or had relationship in some point to the history of information. So the challenge of grouping those objects. It can also be used as a way to think about the ideas of types of network, to think about the contributors to a work, idea or situation, looking at the different structures. Software influences the way in which we plan an idea, the things we use to put the idea into action, and the words we use to describe things. So computers can be thought about as technical objects with their own being and agency interacting within a network. And there's no clear center of power, so this kind of illustrates that quite well, really. There's lots of different ways of observing what the center of power might be in a situation. So this is some examples of the types of creative work produced by the influence of software. There's lots of different avenues through which software influences creative work. So we've got a picture from Hello Cat Food, whose name is Antonio Roberts, and that's the one on the right. And then there's Jaromil, who works with code, a code artist at the bottom. And then at the top is kind of an example of, it's just 4chan, kind of the influence of 4chan and forums like that. Okay, so, hang on, sorry, I just found myself. So yeah, the software's influence blurs and moves around the established, understood categories. Creative production and how it's defined becomes more fluid and more interdisciplinary under the influence of software. Software kind of enables that to happen. The way that artworks are approached can be influenced by ideas of different exchanges and structures, and also by the black box, so the idea of an entity whose inner workings it's not possible to completely understand. Not something which can necessarily be mastered, but something to engage with in different ways. So we're going to look at 2 artists whose work engages with the impact of software in quite different ways. So Harry Sanderson is an artist who interrogates the human, like he talks about the human body in relation to software, also kind of the way that capitalism regulates beings, like humans, and he's kind of critical of that. And his work on the left, is it on the left? Yeah. It's called Unified Fabric, and that's it at Arcadia Mesa in London. And this is a render farm in the center. And he's created, it's interesting, this work, because the render farm is sitting in the gallery in situ alongside all of the video works, which kind of brings the relationship between the software, the object, the process, and the product, as well into one space in which people can kind of engage with. And Sanderson is working on a new project, which he talked about recently, which was also at the Science Museum, actually. And this is part of, it's to do with the production of an image using glass. I'll describe it exactly as I've written it, because that's the best, clearest description. So glass, light goes through the glass at a specific angle to produce certain image. The design is based on the dynamics of light. So the idea of this work, the idea behind this is kind of, you can see there's a large amount of processes that have gone into the production of this instantaneous image on a material which is quite familiar, quite historically. You know, glass it's been used for centuries, and he brings together the past, these older materials, new processes. But he's also quite aware of the in his work, as you can see with the render farm, of the people and the processes that have gone into the work. So with the glass project, he was talking about working with teams of different people. And I think this is an example of an artist who is quite engaged in talking to people about his work, which is kind of a way to address perhaps some of the problems of looking at art and authorship through software, I suppose. Okay, so basically, yeah, the object, the image it produces, and the complete process are all important, and he's recognizing that. Okay, so the next artist is called Callie Spooner, and she kind of works in a very different way with software. Software is not whereas Harry Sanderson has put sort of software object or software into a space in a quite an obvious way. Callie Spooner introduces the software, but also the content that is produced by software, and plays with those on a scale of time. So she uses live and choreographed voices and gestures in different combinations, and she creates changing energies and invites people to take part. And it's interesting to note that she thinks it's better when she's not, well, she said in a talk recently that it's better when she's not there, actually. She likes it when she's not there, to see things unfold. So the content she uses as a start point comes from speeches or conversations as reported or recorded in mainstream media. So you have things like Lance Armstrong's apologies on Oprah, or the speech written for Obama by his speechwriter, or the gesture of Beyonce removing an earpiece while miming the US national anthem. She has the power to chop and change. Callie Spooner, sorry, not Beyonce, has the power to chop and change these texts, and she sort of does. And it's kind of about her power as an artist, as well as the power of the different dancers, the different opera singers. So the lady on the left is an opera singer, and then there's some dancers on the right-hand side. She's produced a kind of opera in a gallery in Munich, and it's a mini opera based on these kind of texts. These texts from the speeches from Obama's speechwriter, the apologies to Oprah, and she kind of chops them up and gets the performers to interpret them. But she's again another person who if you look at her work, she talks about the process a lot. She talks about the different stages. She's aware of all of the different agents, and her being removed from the space is actually kind of shows that she's thinking about those power balances all the time, and also the power of the technical object the technique has. She talks about it as techniques, so how we are changed through techniques. So technology is less visibly present, but it's obviously present nonetheless. And these are two very different approaches, and obviously there's lots and lots of different ways you can look at these things, but it's kind of, we're trying to think about the way that, we're trying to think about examples of ways in which people have think about the power of the software, the power of the different agents within a different structure of creating, and also which should reflect in the structure of the way in which you interact with an artwork. So yeah, I think we're early, sorry. Yeah. We finished a bit early, sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Antes de nada, muchísimas gracias por invitarnos, ¿no?, a mostrar un poco las reflexiones que vamos a traer, ¿no?
Bueno, buenos días, good morning, buen día. Ya os han comentado cuál es el título de nuestra ponencia. Vamos a tratar de hacerlo con cierto humor y abreviando, ¿no?, que es uno de mis problemas, que suelo enrollarme mucho, ¿no? Bien, las sociedades contemporáneas viven obsesionadas con la idea de apocalipsis. En cierto sentido, no es nada nuevo. Realmente, desde los años 60, con todo el problema de la bomba atómica y luego ya con los 90, se ha hablado mucho de las famosas sociedades del riesgo, de Ulrich Beck. El problema es cómo las tecnologías y la implantación de los criterios y los códigos de la globalización han incrementado esa sensación de apocalipsis, haciendo cercanas todas aquellas sensaciones de tragedias, desastres, etcétera, de todas aquellas cuestiones que parece que nos pueden tocar y nos pueden tocar de alguna manera muy de lleno y de manera muy rápida. Como no hay manera de contrastar en muchísimos casos los datos o la veracidad de toda la rumorología que expandimos y de acuerdo con la cual somos afectados a través de los media, es muy difícil combatir ese tipo de sensación, más aún cuando se produce lo que Castells ya ha denominado la crisis de los estados-nación contemporáneos. Y los estados tampoco nos ofrecen ninguna garantía hoy por hoy de que nos proporcionan una salvaguarda con respecto a todo ese tipo de tragedias. Lo que suele suceder, ¿vale?, cuando se produce una hecatombe, un apocalipsis en este sentido, es que se suele echar la culpa casi siempre a la máquina y al propio funcionamiento de la máquina. Por poner un ejemplo relativamente reciente, concretamente el 7 de mayo de 2010, se produjo lo que Ted Kaufman, un senador demócrata norteamericano, denominó la batalla de los algoritmos. El índice Dow Jones empezó a caer en picado ese día, en teoría por un fallo de las máquinas que estaban ya controlando de manera maligna toda la economía mundial. Cada vez que esto se produce, nosotros arrancamos o accedemos a ver una dimensión de la realidad que no veíamos, que es la fragilidad, no solo con la que se desarrollan nuestras propias vidas, sino también la fragilidad de la que está afectada la propia realidad, ¿no? No hay una realidad no mediada. Lo que pasa es que se desvelan, cuando el medio falla, aspectos de esa realidad que normalmente no vemos. Yo siempre explico, bueno, pues yo vivo en un 6º piso. Cuando cojo el ascensor, vivo en un 6º piso. Si un día llego y el ascensor ha fallado y tengo que subir por la escalera, de lo que me doy cuenta es de lo alto que vivo, ¿vale? Sigo viviendo en el 6º piso. La escalera es un media, como los medios tecnológicos, ¿vale? No habría ninguna diferencia, no hay una realidad no mediada. Si de alguna manera esto es así, lo que sucede es que se abren todos los aspectos de las sociedades del control, que Deleuze delineó en su postdata sobre las sociedades del control, y de alguna manera lo que nosotros queremos sostener aquí es que cuando esas cosas se rompen, cuando los medios que nos desvelan determinados aspectos del mundo se rompen, no funcionan o quedan pasados de moda, nos parecen más interesantes, ¿no? Incluso en sociedades que están sometidas a eso, que se llaman ciudadanos, categorizados como consumidores y sometidos a la famosa obsolescencia programada. Si con la realidad de alguna manera pasa esto, nosotros desviaremos el concepto de apocalipsis al concepto, desde la idea de zombie media, al concepto de apocaliptein, ¿no?, a su origen etimológico. El significado viene a expresar cómo realmente podemos desvelar a través de ese apocaliptein algo que ya estaba escondido previamente. La realidad siempre está ahí. Lo que sucede es que depende de la mediación que utilicemos, la veremos de una manera o la veremos de otra. Si esa es la parte que corresponde a la realidad, nosotros diríamos qué es lo que pasa con los sujetos, ¿no? No hay datos estadísticos al respecto, pero nosotros de alguna manera sí que vamos a aludir a 3 tipos de seres humanos, generalizando mucho, que es lo que nos da, el tiempo que nos da esta ponencia, ¿no? Podríamos argumentarlo más, pero no hay tiempo. Generalizando mucho, hablaremos que por una parte están todos los tecnócratas, son todos aquellos que son capaces de decir a los ordenadores qué es lo que tienen que hacer. Los zombies, yo sería una, ¿no?, que normalmente tendemos a hacer lo que los ordenadores nos dicen o lo que nos permiten los propios ordenadores, y todos aquellos creativos, también me identificaría con una de ellas y Moisés también, que de alguna manera saben aprovechar esos errores, esos fallos de la tecnología o esos fallos de los medios de una manera lúdica, a través de, bueno, en cuanto pasa algo, automáticamente cuando el índice Dow Jones cayó, aparecieron todo tipo de geeks, frikis, etcétera, que se dedicaron a estudiar el fenómeno como uno de los grandes hitos de la humanidad, más allá del desastre del propio Dow Jones, ¿no? Nos parece un hecho especialmente significativo porque ya está recogido en el artículo 3 de Ralph Koster en relación a la Declaración de los Derechos del Jugador, ¿no? Hemos decidido leer este trozo.
Vamos a leerlo directamente porque tiene el suficiente empaque y el suficiente interés, ¿no? Dice: el principio de toda soberanía en un espacio virtual reside en el hecho inalterable de que en algún lugar hay una persona que controla el hardware y en el que se está ejecutando el espacio virtual y en el software con el que se creó, y la base de datos que constituye su existencia. Sin embargo, los habitantes de ese espacio virtual tienen el derecho de conocer y exigir el cumplimiento de las normas por las que esta persona utiliza ese poder sobre la comunidad. La autoridad debe proceder de la comunidad. Por lo tanto, una comunidad que no conoce las normas por las que los administradores utilizan su poder es una comunidad que permite que sus administradores no tengan normas, y es una comunidad que manifiesta complicidad con la tiranía. De aquí que el interés de buscar ese aprovechamiento de lo que llamamos lo creativo del error, ¿no? Y ponemos el ejemplo, en este caso, de Melissa Barrow, y con su trabajo Antitol, que en realidad son capturas de pantallas, donde trabaja con hardware obsoleto, como serán telares, para reproducir, y software obsoleto, en este caso son juegos, reproducir ese error por medio de medios completamente zombies, ¿no? En este sentido, o en este caso, dispositivo zombie, diríamos más, ¿no? En ese sentido. La cuestión parte de por qué más de la mitad de la humanidad es zombie, ¿no, Marina?
Bien, la verdad, ¿por qué dejamos, no? ¿Por qué mantenemos esa complicidad con la tiranía cuando todos realmente nos manifestamos como demócratas, como progresistas, etcétera, etcétera? El origen está en las famosas cajas negras que conforman los media y en lo que es toda la propia aplicación industrial y económica que está interesada en que efectivamente desconozcamos cuál es el funcionamiento del hardware, del software y de todos los aparatos que tenemos. Nos remitiríamos en este sentido a la diferencia entre white box y black box. De alguna manera, la intención sería convertir las tecnologías en cajas blancas o en cajas transparentes, según afirma Bruno Latour. Es verdad que la industria apenas nos deja derecho para manipular las cosas, para abrirlas, para destriparlas, ¿no? A mí misma me han puesto una sanción por tratar de arreglar el fregaplatos, se negaron, y tratar de conseguir una pieza por mi cuenta. Las piezas de nuestros aparatos, pensar en los iPhones, por ejemplo, no son conseguibles, no se recambian, no las podemos recambiar nosotros mismos porque hay intereses económicos e industriales detrás. No hay más remedio. En ese sentido, sí que es verdad que también hay mucha white box en todo lo que es open source, en todo lo que es intentos de configuración del hardware, y en este sentido nos remitiríamos a Bruno Latour en el propio Parlamento de las Cosas, donde él diferencia entre dos tipos de objetos: los objetos calvos, que son los objetos que permanecen cerrados, pero también él habla de unos objetos melenudos, ¿no? Que son los objetos que se enredan con las personas para, de alguna manera, constituir un híbrido vinculado al concepto de agenciamiento que ya ha salido en alguna ponencia anterior. Ese tipo de híbrido o esa capacidad de agencia de las cosas no diferencia tanto entre sujetos y objetos. Y bueno, aunque Bruno Latour en determinado momento lo remite a los agentes sociales, nosotros queremos descentralizarlo de ahí para hablar de una hibridación entre sujeto y máquina, entre sujeto y tecnología y realidad, que es realmente a la que de alguna manera queremos atender. Esto no es nuevo en arte. Es decir, ya hay una tradición artística desde la que se ha trabajado aquí.
Sí, que en este caso hemos apuntado a Boris Arbatov, para la cual los objetos se ensamblan, deben ser objetos abiertos, transparentes, que no esconden su código, y para tener ese éxito en este concepto de agenciamiento que apuntaba Marina, hay que ser desobediente tecnológicamente, hay que transgredir, ¿no? ¿De qué manera un poco planteamos esa transgresión, ¿no? Desde lo zombie, como decimos, o planteamos en ese sentido, ¿no? ¿Y por qué, no? ¿Y por qué lo hacemos así?
Bien, la cuestión es por varias razones, ¿no? Para empezar, todas las máquinas que ya han caído en desuso, que no utilizamos, todo lo que se llama zombie media, todas las máquinas antiguas, realmente son aquellas que ya conocemos, con la que tenemos cierta familiaridad, ¿no? Les tenemos cierto cariñito, ya nos hemos enredado con ellas, ya hemos liado nuestros pelos, como diría Bruno Latour, ¿no? Y ellas con nosotros. Son máquinas que ya han fallado, que están en desuso, que nos ayudan a cobrar conciencia de esa realidad precisamente a través del fallo y de nosotros mismos, ver esos otros lados o esas otras intenciones, y con lo cual además ya tienen una tradición de imaginario colectivo que puede ser descentralizada. Son máquinas muy accesibles, en general baratas, en muchos casos las tenemos hasta en casa, ¿no? Yo misma tengo varios teléfonos móviles por casa de estos que ya no se usan y ya están en desuso, y uno los puede abrir, ensayar, ver cómo son por dentro, probar a cruzar cables, etcétera, etcétera. Nos permiten, por lo tanto, un ensayo lúdico, un ensayo vinculado al juego, sin ningún tipo de coste económico, porque ya disponemos de ellos. Y nuestra relación con ellas incluso ya presupone una conducta de juego, en muchísimos casos, porque están ahí como, es decir, las vemos como casi curiosidades. Podemos convertirlas en cajas transparentes, de alguna manera es más fácil, ¿no? No perdemos nada. Nos invitan a que trabajemos con ellas de esa manera.
Y dices, ¿qué hay que transgredir, ¿no? En este caso planteamos como 3 patas, ¿no? Que las que hemos planteado durante todo el tiempo. Una es el software, otra es el hardware y otra es la teoría en la que se basa, ¿no? Lo que llamamos la arqueología de los media. Pero de esa forma, ¿de qué forma lo hacemos, ¿no? Nosotros, si bien hay 2 tendencias fundamentales, que son el do it yourself, nosotros planteamos unirnos a la otra tendencia, ¿no? Do it yourself, pero with others, ¿no? Con otros. Porque es fundamental esa cuestión de esa interdisciplinaridad, esa mutación. Nosotros hablábamos o planteamos, incluso a lo mejor de una manera demasiado vehemente, la virificación, ¿no? Es cuando entras en ese espacio técnico, tecnológico y conceptual que hace que se construya esa relación, ¿no? Que planteábamos para eso, ¿no? Desde el punto de vista de la arqueología de los medios.
Vamos a ir viendo ahora un poco qué pasaría con la arqueología, con el hardware y con el software. Bueno, desde el punto de vista de la arqueología de los medios, podemos decir que tradicionalmente, la más tradicional, se basa en una idea de archivo lineal, entendiendo que hay progreso y que lo último es lo mejor, ¿no? Nosotros planteamos, respetamos ese punto de vista, pero nosotros lo que planteamos es basar una anarqueología en una idea de anarchivo partiendo de las teorías de Zielinski, de Siegfried Zielinski. ¿Ese anarchivo de qué sería? Sería acerca de todo lo olvidado, de todas las tecnologías disfuncionales, de las descartadas, de las erróneas, para plantear un concepto de historia mucho más basado en lo que podía haber sido o abriéndolo a lo posible y, por lo tanto, manifestando nuestro interés fundamentalmente en el futuro que en una historia vinculada al pasado o en un tipo de archivo concretamente, yo diría que diferente. Se trata de modificar la historia, pero de modificarla para abrirla a un montón de posibilidades, de pensar realmente en ese futuro que queremos construir con otros, ¿no? Colectivamente.
Sí, en ese ejemplo de anarchivo planteábamos el trabajo de César Escudero, que se llama Tapebook, en el cual pues, realiza y recupera los perfiles de sujetos más relevantes para él, para el autor, en Facebook, y los registra o codifica, podríamos decir, en un sistema mucho más antiguo, ¿no? Construyendo o otorgándole utilidad a ese dispositivo zombie que de por sí es el cassette, ¿no? La cinta. Podríamos hablar incluso, abrir una puerta hacia lo que llamamos social zombie, ¿no? Toda esa parte del estado latente en las redes sociales o aspectos funerarios, ¿no? Podríamos llegar a hablar, ¿no? En un momento dado.
Bien, y si hemos arrancado de la anarqueología, lo que queremos también manifestar es que toda relación anarqueológica necesita de una práctica, ¿no? Nos remitiríamos a Jussi Parikka, que sí que ha diseñado, ha resumido todo lo que es el zombie media en 5 puntos y concretamente en el 5º, él dice literalmente, es ya tiempo de desarrollar el paso de un método textual a lo material, un material que tenga en cuenta la cultura de la economía política de los medios contemporáneos. ¿Se trata, por tanto, de utilizar ese medio como un método artístico?
Sí, por supuesto.
Explícalo.
Bueno, lo voy a explicar muy rápidamente porque tenemos poco tiempo. En realidad, hablamos desde la manipulación del software, con un clásico que todos conoceremos, de Cory Arcángel, o desde la manipulación del hardware, otro clásico de Cory Arcángel que no puedo evitar de poner en esta presentación, o desde el punto de vista también de esa manipulación del hardware que hablábamos, pues desde el punto de vista de la mixtura, ¿no? Del punto de vista incluso del recorrido, lo que llamamos el camino, el walker, ¿no? En ese sentido. También desde el recurso estético, pues toda la cultura glitch que estamos en ese planteamiento, o incluso desde ese también el recurso estético, hablando desde una relación con lo que llamamos de una fusión, entre comillas, una descontextualización, sin perder parte de su capacidad de usabilidad, pero completamente como un objeto zombie, ¿no? en ese sentido, ¿no? Esos son un poco los ejemplos que queríamos plantear. Esta producción a tres patas que planteábamos, hardware, software y teoría, tiene 3 modos de operar. Uno es la disección, para abrir posibilidades de recombinación de elementos, otra es la regeneración y otra es la reparación, ¿no? En esos elementos planteamos proyectos tales como el de Eva Roth, que es la disección y la recombinación del imaginario, viendo esa idea de traducción a otro medio impreso, un medio mucho más lento que la caché propia del trabajo. Planteamos proyectos también de esa idea de disección y transcodificación de Néstor Lizalde, donde se construye o se fabrica, mejor dicho, el objeto a partir de un disco de la Velvet Underground, donde hay una transcodificación del proyecto, del mensaje en sí. O también proyectos como el de Afroditi Pexarra, en el cual se trabaja o se manipula una tejedora para trabajar con algoritmos, los cuales son una visualización de datos, en este caso de Manpower, que es la empresa de empleo, ¿no? Es la estatización de los datos, ¿no? Y, por último, en este ejemplo, y a modo creemos, de catálogo, es el concepto de reparación, ¿no? La idea de ese catálogo de Ernesto Oroza, muy interesante, que habla sobre las arquitecturas de la necesidad de la desobediencia electrónica, ¿no? Esa idea de entender una idea de los usos, mejorarlos, creativos y sostenibles, una idea desde un punto de vista con una perspectiva política. Pensemos que estamos en Cuba, ¿no? Es un caso cubano, ¿no?
Bueno, esta producción que nosotros decimos que tiene 3 patas, ya es evidente, me parece que ha quedado en evidencia que no reniega de la política, genera una nueva tecnocracia sostenible que de alguna manera se opone a esa obsolescencia programada desde la propia ecosofía de Guattari, que ya alguien ha anunciado que propone una triple ecología que es medioambiental, social y mental. ¿Para qué? Para producir nuevos modos de subjetivación, nuevos modos de agenciamiento que pueden provocar precisamente que todo el precariado contemporáneo, que es nuestra propia situación como sujetos en este momento de crisis, encuentre ciertas medidas o ciertos modos de empoderamiento. De ese modo proponemos que para estudiar los media zombies se pase de esa obsolescencia programada que nos delimita o que nos delinea como consumidores a una serie de consideraciones vinculadas a los modos de producción que tienen que ser de alguna manera libres desde la propia ecosofía. ¿Libres por qué? Pues porque nosotros entendemos que hoy por hoy nosotros somos tiempo, que todo lo que es la industria y el orden económico mundial se basa en esa compra-venta de tiempo, que es el tiempo el que de alguna manera falla y puede producir cierto nivel de apocalipsis o de hecatombe, lo tiene de alguna manera implícita, y esos modos de producción lúdica lo que nos pueden ayudar es a reapropiarnos de alguna manera del propio tiempo que somos, que nos conforma y que nos constituye. Lo importante en este sentido a lo mejor no es plantearnos si tenemos mucho o poco tiempo, como dirá Zielinski, ¿no? Sino saber quién dispone de nuestro tiempo y por qué, para poder reapropiarnos de él.
Bueno, y como tenemos un minuto,
Pues vamos a ir muy rápido.
Partimos también de un concepto, el concepto que hablábamos antes, también de do it yourself with others, y para nosotros es interesante ver las 2 patas fundamentales de esa relación, que es la práctica social, esa reapropiación de las tecnologías. Hablaríamos de colectivos de circuit bending, etcétera. Y otro concepto muy interesante que es el de reunión, ¿no? Que es la idea de socialización y ritualización del evento, ¿no? En ese caso, pues poníamos como ejemplo las hacking nights, ¿no? En ese sentido. Todo eso tiene un carácter lúdico y tiene otra vez otra triple pata, ¿no? La idea de peligro, que es muy extendida en filosofía, pero para nosotros lo tomamos desde un punto de vista casi lúdico, la idea de peligro, esa relación con el high voltage, low voltage, ¿no? La idea de actitud, de una actitud de paidia, de una actitud frente al medio completamente libre, y una actitud de ludus frente a los nuevos medios, esas reglas que se nos plantean, ¿no?
Y bien, un poco ya retomando el principio, hablando de ese tiempo disfuncional del que partíamos, de esa espera cuando el medio falla, que uno está esperando, o bien que se recupere, o bien dándole al escape, etcétera, etcétera, retomar la idea de que efectivamente en los zombie media el tiempo posee una capacidad disfuncional, que a través de ellos podemos aprender a manejar los media de otra manera y, lógicamente, no vamos a renunciar tampoco a los medios nuevos. En ese sentido, lo que ambos comparten es que en ambos casos el tiempo es procesual y es algorítmico, y si efectivamente estos usuarios nuevos con hardware, software y teoría en compañía y de manera lúdica podemos apoderarnos otra vez de nuestro tiempo y poseerlo, es posible que los logaritmos, consigamos que los logaritmos se abran a posibilidades nuevas o alternativas. Aquí nosotros hemos recogido 2 ejemplos que ni siquiera voy a explicar porque no nos queda tiempo, ¿no? Un poco a partir de Miyakazi, hablar de lo que es el algoritmo, tendríamos que decir en castellano, ¿no? La palabra ritmo que está implicada en el algoritmo, él diferencia esas 2 cosas. Y en segundo lugar, el propio Alex Galloway, cuando nos habla del alegoritmo, ¿no? La capacidad de alegoría que puede estar implícita dentro de lo que es el propio algoritmo, ¿no? Y bueno, nombrar simplemente, y para acabar, 3 conclusiones, a manera muy rápido, para empezar, esa idea de zombie media que muestra el conflicto entre ese modelo de usuario que está impuesto por las grandes compañías de fabricación de tecnología y el comportamiento real de los usuarios, que pueden perturbar una visión concreta de esos usos de la tecnología. En segundo lugar, los zombie media producen jugadores que no son neutrales, que asumen una postura crítica con respecto al mundo y a los valores de juego. Y, por último, señalar que algo que hemos dejado en el aire y que sería motivo para un nuevo trabajo es cómo efectivamente los zombie media pueden llevar a la adquisición de una conciencia inmersiva y crítica, no simplemente a esa idea de introducirse con respecto a los nuevos medios, a partir de una emersión, porque los zombie media no son inmersivos. De esa manera conseguiríamos que los zombie media acaben con todos los usuarios zombie. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We want to talk about this project that is a work in process project. We are working in an interface manifesto. I am going to talk more about the context of the project. Then Andreu is going to talk about the theoretical framework, and then Clara talk more about the interface manifesto more in depth. So this project is in the framework of PIPES project. It's an European project that is about is a participatory investigation of public engaging spaces. We are working with ZKM, based in Karlsruhe, Sian, and based in Prague, and we are the Hangar team, and also Brian's company that is also in Prague. The European project is about the creation of a visual interface about visual communication, but our role in the investigation, the role of Hangar team is more about the research and research in interfaces in a critical perspective and paying attention of ethics. Start the investigation, the Hangar team that is here. Clara also is in the team. Marta is here, and Tere. And then in the team we incorporate Andreu, Belsunces, myself, and Vega that is not here. And we work together around this idea about how can we work about interfaces in this critical and ethical way. And we start to think, and at the beginning we thought that building an interface manifesto, it could be a good starting point, but and good way and good methodology to collect and to put in the manifesto all the conclusions or all the ideas that we are working during all the process. Is for us the manifesto is the starting point, is also the motor of the investigation, is also the arrival point, and the manifesto is changing the shape during all the process. And we collect information through activities, building networks and tools. Yes, thank you. We are developing some activities around this topic, interfaces and critical and ethics. There are 2 PhDs crossing the project, and we developed some workshops, readings, seminars, round table, about interface dictatorship, some interviews, meetings and all this kind of, and also writings, all these kind of activities are generating information that we are putting in some way in the manifesto. Also, we are building networks of these colleagues and people, institutions that are interested in the same field, and these kind of activities attract people and attract institutions that work in this, and all these interactions are also reflected in the manifesto, and for us it's important to mention the tools, because a tool is also an interface, and we are interested in this concept. The tools that we are working with open tools and different paper, pencil, Mural.ly, or Google Drive, Etherpad, and more the core of the content is in WordPress in the web, pipeshangar.org. And we are putting there all the content around the work in progress of the Interface Manifesto. So the Interface Manifesto is a kind of methodology of working, and then Andreu is going to talk about the theoretical framework.
Hi. Now I will talk about the theoretical framework on which is based this interface manifesto where we are working through. But first of all, I would like to read a sentence from Lev Manovic, which I think that it describes quite well the spirit that is behind our research group. Here we go. So any investigation of code, software architectures, or interfaces is only available if it helps to understand how these technologies are reshaping societies, individuals, and our imaginations. Well, when we started the research, we began to think about data, about visualization, about interfaces, but what we had clear, as Laia said, was that a highly critical perspective should be central. Each of the participants of the team comes from a different background, visual and cultural studies, sociology, art, or design, which has created a quite interdisciplinary point of view on this issue. Then, having decided that our path will follow the Interface Manifesto as a goal, we began a theoretical research with the aim to basis this Interface Manifesto, reading and discussing several texts. So now we are seeing here in white colors the disciplines. This is a brief abstract of all the things that we have read. Obviously, there is not everything. On blue we have the authors, and in green we have the ideas. The first to come out when we began to talk about interface was the idea of representation, interface as representation. Interfaces are very remediate objects, and they are fed by other media as print, photograph, or cinema. And we began to ask ourselves which metaphors were used in interface. No? For example, the brush, the pencil. There are certain symbols that have remained, but other has gone. This is because interfaces are very dynamic. And in this point, media studies, semiotics or aesthetics, and concretely Lev Manovic, Bertersen, and Paul or Català were central. Then we went deeper. Interfaces are becoming ubiquitous, and they have become a universal language to relate to reality, affecting our public and private activities. They are social, psychological, political, or economical, and this is important, unnoticed infrastructures. And many things are happening there. As a networked objects, interfaces are fields where different actors collide. Developers, coders, coding languages, standards, browsers, institutions as web consortium, users, well, different actors are dialoguing in a constant flow. Obviously, Bruno Latour was a must on this new materialistic point of view, and we're researching, departing from this, on actor network theory or science and technology studies. Well, as Marina and Moisés just said, well, technologies are kind of black boxes. Interfaces have a great agency power. As black boxes, or as Fuller and Goffrey says in their book Evil Media, they are obscurely grey out zones. And by doing this, interfaces hide their processes and they embody choices and worldviews where power is root and displayed. In this point, perspectives from software and media studies were extremely useful. Interfaces don't hide just their functioning, but also themselves. As we learned with Olia Liliana, among other authors related to art and design, there's a curious paradox. As computers are becoming more and more present in our life, there are growing attempts to create a computerless illusion. Tools are becoming a nuisance, something that's clear when thinking on augmented reality application or wearables. The machine does everything for us, effortless and painlessly. Nevertheless, of this illusion, interfaces are now more than ever fields of data collection. Our performing on screens provide quantifiable data test, which is exploited to better understand users or improve interfaces. As Fuller and Goffrey said, it is perhaps uncertain how just far behavior has been transformed into economics. Indeed, interfaces have become behavioral labs, but experimental subjects are unaware humans. Here, sociology helps us to understand how important is the concept of users when thinking on interfaces. As Liliana says, this word is disappearing from the designer's discourse, preferring to talk about people. General computer user is perceived as someone who's not interested on the tool but on the results. And in this sense, the ideal subject of designer reaches its materiality on interfaces. Last, interfaces become highly visible or even exotic on net or digital art or on video games, where the creator's intentions is to maximize computer experience. This is important, as Liliana says, users must be empowered as workers were empowered in the 19th century, and for those, they should be aware of their role.
So during this presentation, my colleagues have already addressed the manifesto that we are working on, and I'd like to stress this idea as the manifesto functions not only as a goal, but also as the leitmotif of our research, and crosses many activities, as Laia explained. And also, the manifesto constitutes somehow the compass that has been guiding us along the wide and heterogeneous bibliography that Andreu mentioned. So all these activities, conversations, and reading have been nurturing the background of the Critical Interface Manifesto. And in this framework, on November 18, a collective work session took place in Hangar, in which some key concepts were shared and discussed. The methodology that we followed within this framework was just to carry out a brainstorming session in which every of us would contribute with 3 statements that could be part of an interface manifesto. And then we tried to organize some of these shared ideas, and the result was a compilation of statements that summarize some controversial concepts crossing the interface conceptualization, such as transparency or symmetry or collaboration, ownership, openness, etc. Many of these ideas came from the authors that Andreu mentioned, but also from the activities and the conversations during all the process. But we have also been looking at the wide tradition of manifesto that exist in the fields of art and technology. There are just a few, many more we have been reading, but these are some that we consider inspiring somehow. I'm sure you know most of them, or all of them. The Genome Manifesto by Richard Stallman, which is an explanation and a definition of the goals of the GNU project, but also it functions as a philosophical source for the free software movement. Then the Hackers Manifesto is also like a guideline to hackers, but it's interesting because it serves also as an ethical foundation for hacking, because it asserts that there is a point to hacking that supersedes the selfish desires to exploit or harm other people. Then the First Thing First Manifesto, which was written in the 60s, and as a reaction to the rich and affluent Britain of the 60s, and this manifesto tried to re-radicalize the design industry, which the signatories of the manifesto felt that has become lazy and uncritical. This manifesto, the First Thing First Manifesto, has influences by the critical theory, the Frankfurt School, and the counterculture of that moment. And it explicitly affirms the belief that design is not a neutral or value-free process. Then, well, the Critical Engineering Manifesto that considers engineering to be the most transformative language of our time, and there even exists already a manifesto for a post-digital interface criticism. What all these manifestos have in common is that somehow they try to fight like the lack of ethics in the industry and in the economic system. They also consider that technology should be used to expand our horizons, and at last they invite us to think critically. So there is a lot of work done before we start this project, and we are aware of that. And of course, all of this begs some basic questions, like why should we write another manifesto, and how can we contribute to this field? So why to write a manifesto? Because as we have seen, a manifesto is a political declaration of intentions or views, and it seemed appropriate to us to use this kind of output that stress the political aspect. So if interface design nowadays tend to hide the interface in order to be more user-friendly and giving the illusion of neutrality, by doing a manifesto, we are stressing the ideological aspect of the interface. Another aim that we would like to pursue with the Critical Interface Manifesto is to generate a discussion between those who are concerned about the need of criticism in interface design and those who consider that it should be an ideologically free space. So with all these motivations on our mind, and after looking at all the references that we just have known, we try to summarize the main ideas in a draft. I'm not going to read all of them because we are running out of time, but these are some of the statements that we agreed on, and this is what we have so far. So now, one of our challenges for the future is and hopefully our contribution is to transform all these statements into an interface. And how can we do this? If we consider manifesto itself as an interface, how can we design a coherent manifesto so it can contain its ideology embedded in its own interface? Well, this is a question. We are now at this point. We don't know yet, but we have designed 2 future events in order to answer these questions. And these events are a book sprint, as you must know. A book sprint is a methodology that brings together a group of people to finish a book in a short period of time. We would like to finish not the book, but the manifesto. And we would like to invite not only writers or researchers, but also designers to think together how can we develop this manifesto that would have a shape and a structure and a matter that will be coherent with its ideas. And then another future event that we have is an open call launched by Hangar, Membrana. And this is an open call to support a visual artist who will develop an artwork in the shape of an interface, also thinking about all these concepts. And she will also participate in all the activities that we will do in the drafting of the Critical Interface Manifesto. And yeah, I think I'm on time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me break the ice. Yeah, there's so many interesting ideas that you have presented in all this. One of the common things I think you have all talked in your papers is about this usually hidden aspect. The fact that it's quite overlooked, and I would ask you if you could comment a bit more about or dialogue between each other about these challenges and the problems that are derived from this not knowing about all the influences of interfaces, software, etc.
Who wants to start?
I thought that was an easy question.
I think that one of the challenges regarding to interfaces is you were talking about black boxing, no? And I think that one of the main goals of our work, and I think that most of us can agree on this, is how to show the processes that hide the interfaces in order to raise awareness on our performing when we are dealing with interfaces, no? And which are the consequences of our uses of these tools, no? Not just on the performing with a computer, but also which are the, for example, the ecological impacts, no, in terms of CO2, o como se diga en inglés. No.
I could maybe elaborate on that. I mean, I think that this idea of black boxing is kind of interesting and really hard to unpack, to kind of use a crappy kind of analogy. But I mean, I think that if you look at algorithms or software, it's often very difficult for even the people who wrote it to fully understand it. I mean, if you were to take the entire corpus of the internet, no single person, probably no population of any country or organization could really understand what role that plays. And I think that throws up really interesting questions about sort of, how you can live with something that is so intangible yet so abstract, and so has so many relations with us that kind of are very hard to kind of define. And I think that that's kind of, for me in my presentation, but I think broader, it's something that perhaps it's not about concretely defining what software does, but actually just accepting that there is that level of intangibility or abstraction that you can't get away from, and that perhaps that's kind of a reality that we need to just accept, but also examine and interrogate.
You could also say that breaking things down, lots of different fields and different ways of thinking you can break a situation down, or you can break this problem of the black box down in different ways, which could all be limiting in different ways. So that's where the interdisciplinary nature comes in and is quite is important.
I also think that there's sort of a second level to that black box, that behind this software and all the algorithms that we use are mathematical models that maybe software designers don't fully understand as well. So there's this sort of second level of abstraction that goes into these systems that we use every day. And that makes it even harder to fully understand what's going on. And also, we can understand a bit when they fail. Like you've said, like we sort of understand our relationship to them when they break. But again, it can be not so certain if it's of the design of the mathematical model behind it. So it's also one thing. And what we can try to analyze and understand is our relationship to software. So even if we don't understand the inner workings of software, we can try to see and focus on how we relate to it and what it generates, like as a whole thing, I guess.
I think when you speak about interfaces, you have to think about the open knowledge all the time, you know, because the black box system, it means in sometimes, or sometimes not always, more or less, yeah, this you cannot share the dimension of this because it's only for 1 or 2 or 3 persons. I think the particular thing of the interfaces in global, you know, really global, is to understand the no dimension of the knowledge of these interfaces. When you can understand the no dimension of this knowledge, you can understand that the interface is interesting. Because sometimes this is my point of view, you know, I don't know if you agree with this or not. No? It means it's like amplify everything, you know? And sometimes it's really maybe cheap idea, you know, maybe a simple idea, but in the same time, I think it's to try to see more far away, you know? I don't know.
Hi. Well, one of the many interesting things that you've been saying in this panel is about that. Well, you have just said it. To open the black boxes to discover the non-neutrality of those apparatus in that. So that means that in some way you are trying to go farther than seeing that interfaces and algorithms as a mere result of political actions. So, but this is the next step, no? Not to show the political implications in those algorithms and interfaces, but also as a result of this non-neutrality and ideology that is hidden inside it, but also to produce these political implications and political, I mean, not as a result, but also as a producing, in some way replicating what is hidden inside that. So it's a way to, so in some way connects the idea of the materiality of technological materiality of algorithms and interfaces in computers, with other types, let's say, of infrastructures that, like, for example, many of the other talks said, for example, the museum as the one that stabilizes objects and then destabilize objects. I don't know if you have thought about these implications, because some of you have also thought about the exhibition as an interface, for example. So let's bring this idea of interface and algorithms not as a result of this, but also as a production of, I mean, not just materialities but also subjects that are behind that and what that it means, no? And also products.
You could approach. It's quite nice if you can approach things from the software studies point of view, in that you can look at a situation from all different angles. You can think about it if you see like a diagram with all the different points. So like the museum, the talk about the museum yesterday, he was showing us all the systems that were required to keep an artwork as it is for a long period of time. You could, if a nice thing about the approach of software studies is that you can attack it, that's not the right word, but from any different point, from lots of different points in that chain, and then you can go, so you could look at a really tiny thing and go outwards from there, or you could try and look at things from the organization down, but I don't know whether which is more successful exactly, but I don't know I just thought that was worth saying, because you can change the scale at which you're looking at something, and that might be help reveal stuff about the politics of that situation.
I think it could be worth like referring to Ben Bratton's stack as like a kind of model for the multiple relations that kind of everything around us has and the kind of politics that it creates. And I think that he kind of posits this idea of like the black stack as the kind of idea of the future thing that we can't really identify because it is a producer of reality. And I think that's a really interesting thing in terms of kind of how, you know, we need to very much accept the fact that technical objects create subjectivity, and you know, by kind of interrogating that, you can kind of start to understand, you know, maybe the politics that are involved or that are created through these kinds of tools. I don't know if that sort of helps to kind of. I really liked his talk about kind of the algorithms not really caring about us anymore, and that perhaps, you know, we wouldn't be the primary interest for the sort of the black stack, which I think is kind of interesting because it does kind of raise the importance of having to kind of be sensitive to the politics or the sort of the creative element of what we would call kind of an object, but perhaps it's not quite an object.
Related to this, like 1 month ago, I was in a talk of Jerome Zimmerman, which is a cyber activist or something like this, and he was talking about how the objects are shaping ourselves, no, our subjectivities, and he was talking that when he began to relate to computers was in the 90s, and in the 90s when you bought a computer, this computer came with a manual, and this manual came with a map of the circuits of the computer, so you could open it and learn by blending it, no? And now our cell phones or Macs are like, and they, as you said before, no, they don't enable us to talk to them on an horizontal way, no. So we are learning to think. If we think through objects, we are learning to think through an object that cannot be changed. And in some way, we are accepting things like Facebook is like Facebook and cannot work in some other way, and we can make a extrapolation and begin to think that relations can be on one way and not in another ways. No, this is not new. The reproduction of these social patterns were reproduced by other institutions, but now technology, I think that is becoming another layer through where we live our lives. No, something like that some years ago could be religion or family. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that's important, since we sort of take for granted how these pieces of software are, since we take for granted how these pieces of software work, instead of us being able to change them as we, like 12 years ago, we change ourselves in order to interact properly with these pieces of software. So they start modifying our behavior toward the world. And so instead of software sort of trying to fit our lives, we try to fit our lives to the software we're using or through it. So that's an interesting thing too.
I mean, you could go back to Laborde Clinic and Felix Guattari's kind of process of deterritorialization with the same process. So you could say that you're territorialized by the sort of accepted usage of a particular piece of software, Facebook as an example. And, you know, an interesting way to do things would be to try and sort of think differently, or kind of not accept that that's potentially the right way to do things, and kind of try and see if there's other kind of avenues that you can kind of examine that piece of software.
Thank you. I think we should close here the morning session. See you after lunch. Thank you.